there's an Irish company, Alumina, whose revenues have soared since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, along with its exports there. Alumina that's then turned into weapons that are used against Ukraine. And that brings us to our Spotlight segment. And we go to Stockholm and say hello to Wayne Jordash, attorney and president of the Global Rights Compliance Foundation. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thanks for having me.
This Alumina is off the list. Explain to our viewers. This is right the composite that comes from bauxite that's mined in places like Guinea and Brazil.
That's right, and it finds its way to Ireland, to the Shannon Delta and the Shannon Estuary, to a company, as you just mentioned, Angonish Alumina, which then supplies directly into Russia the alumina, which then goes into smelters, and the smelters then convert that into aluminium. And logic and common sense dictates that that finds its way into Russia's war machine.
And why is it not on the list of sanctioned materials?
That's a good question, and it's a question that the Irish government and the EU need to really address. In 2018, the US sanctioned this company for two reasons, really. One, because it was controlled by Deripaska, who is an oligarch who's very close to Putin and currently resident in Russia and known as one of Putin's favored oligarchs. And sanctions were applied to him, and sanctions were also applied to the company, Angonish Alumina. Now, what happened was that the Irish government, along with other governments such as the French government, the German government, the Italian government, lobbied the US to lift those sanctions against the company on the basis that the company was of strategic importance to the EU. Now, what did that mean? What does strategic importance mean? It means essentially that the alumina industry was important for the EU's economies. And so, having lobbied the US to lift the sanctions, what they agreed was we will lift the sanctions against the company, provided Deripaska, the oligarch I just mentioned, no longer has a controlling shares in relation to the company. So his shares were reduced so that he didn't control the company, or allegedly didn't control the company. The problem with that now is that this agreement, which then removed the sanctions from the company so it could continue to operate, appears not to have be the case. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, the Swedes tax authorities have just done an investigation and come to the conclusion that, in fact, Deripaska owns more than 50% of the shares, 53.7% of the company, which means he has a controlling stake. But even if he didn't have a controlling stake, if you look at the amount of sales that the company makes to Russia, it's in the region. I mean, the company will say it's around 50% or slightly more, but in fact, actually, independent investigations reveal that it's more in the region of around 2/3, even as high as 80% of the company's output goes to Russia. And it goes to Russia to smelters, as I mentioned earlier, which are co-owned by Deripaska. And from the smelters, it then goes into various EU-sanctioned weapons manufacturers. And so even if Deripaska does not control that amount of the company, he does de facto control the company because, well, it's logical, isn't it? If the company relies so much on business to Russia and that business is so connected to Deripaska, then he has de facto control over the company. So that's one problem, of course, is the issue of sanctions. The second problem is, of course, what happens to the alumina, i.e. finding its way into
I was going to ask about that. Why isn't they're just saying, okay, the company can still function because we need that alumina here in Europe, but you can't sell it to Russia. Why hasn't that happened?
That is a question I can't answer, and I don't understand it myself. On the face of it, that if this company, and I understand it's of strategic importance, it employs a lot of people, and its parent company, Rusal, which is the group Anguish Alumina belongs to, does employ a huge amount of people across Europe, 75,000 people approximately in the European Union. So I can understand, and it's logical that it has economic strategic interests. And that has to be weighed into the balance. Nobody's suggesting otherwise. The problem is, of course, not the operations in the EU. The problem is the fact that 2/3 or even more of its product goes into the Russian economy and the Russian, almost certainly the Russian military machine. So why there cannot be an agreement that the company, first of all, lives by its commitment to have Deripaska removed from having a controlling influence, and two, remove all imports into Russia. It's for me, it's an open question, and it doesn't seem a very logical situation.
Have you at the Global Rights Compliance Foundation reached out to the Irish government?
No, because the Irish government at the moment are involved, they say, in investigating the company. So we wait to see the results of that investigation. But there are some real concerns even with this investigation, because at the moment what the Irish government appears to be saying is, well, we can't see any link between a shipment of alumina leaving the factory and arriving in a particular weapon system in Russia. That betrays, or it certainly misrepresents liability. Liability is not based upon whether you can demonstrate a particular piece of alumina finds its way into a particular weapon system in Russia. The government has an obligation to ensure that it respects, protects, fulfills human rights. That means it has to go a lot further than that. And let me just finally say this. Aiding and abetting is a crime, is a mode of liability that essentially puts the company into the prosecution target. What do I mean by that is, if a company or its members, its management, assist in the commission of crimes by supplying such things as alumina or aluminium, which are then used in a general sense to commit crimes, then those individuals can be held responsible for aiding and abetting. So the Irish government needs to do a lot more than just investigate on the basis that it appears to be investigating. But we wait to see the report.
At the outset of this conversation, Wayne, you said that the Swedish government is investigating, certainly its tax authority, since it found that that Russian oligarch still has a controlling stake. Is Sweden bringing this to the attention of the European Union? Can we expect to see exports of alumina to be on the 22nd package of sanctions of the EU on Russia?
Well, the anxiety I have over the Irish approach, I don't have the same anxiety about the Swedish approach. And the reason for that is this. First of all, there appears to be genuine focus from the Swedish government. On March the 26th, they raided the aluminium plant, which is owned by Rusal in Sweden, and two of the plant's executives have been detained on suspicion of serious sanctions violations. So there is a serious investigation being conducted by the Swedes into the operations of Rusal, and it's, I suspect, the provision of aluminium to the Russian authorities. So I think the Swedes are taking a much more robust approach, and I would imagine, and I'm speculating here, that they will continue to take a robust approach, and we may find some movement on this issue of sanctions.
One final question. There have been investigative journalists who've worked on this story, including in Ireland. Do you feel there is growing awareness?
I think there is growing awareness, but this goes back to my anxiety about the Irish government. The Irish Times have done a fantastic investigation. The Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project in Ireland have done a great investigation, and much of the information that we know now about the alumina going into Russia and almost certainly going into Russian weapon systems has come from these independent investigations. So I think they are doing a great job in raising awareness of this issue. I mean, we really do need to focus on this. Some of the aluminium is going into a company, for example, that makes Iskander missiles. These are heavyweight missiles which have killed in 2025 625 civilians in Ukraine. So really, kudos to these independent investigations. We need to see more done now by state authorities, including Ireland.
Wayne Jordash, so many thanks for speaking with us from Stockholm.
Thank you for having me.